Good morning. So we're in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, chapter 178, Siman Kuf Ayin Ches, Halacha Gimel Halacha 3. So this chapter, right? So we did. I think so. We're holding. This chapter brings codifies that which we learned in the Gemara regarding making brachas while changing location. Right? What do we have so far? In the first two halachas we had from the Alter Rebbe like this. Changing location means changing from one room to another, even in the same building, and then a new bracha is required. Because standing up constitutes ending your eating session, and therefore a new bracha when you go to the new place. Even if you come back to the original place, you can make a new bracha, right? The Alter Rebbe's proof was because if there's a new food item, you anyways have to make a new bracha, right? Mm-hmm. And therefore, if the Gemara says changing location requires a new bracha, it must be you're eating the same food. You still have to make a new bracha. Otherwise, what would be the novelty of this law if you're getting a new food item that you weren't expecting, right? Remember this?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
these are brachas that count.
We're getting there. That's what we're getting to today.
Okay,
that's what we're getting to today. What kind of brachas there are? Then we said within one building, if you had in mind to be moving around while you're eating when you made the bracha to begin with, then moving around in the building is okay, because you had in mind when you made the first bracha that you're going to be moving around, and even if you leave the building, if you're in the courtyard and you could see the place where you ate, continue with the bracha. That's if you had in mind when you made the bracha to begin with. Then in halacha beis we said, if you left people behind, even if you left the room and came back, but because it's people that you sat with together are still there, when you come back, no new bracha. We give the example of the Fabrengen. You leave the Fabrengen for a bit and you come back because the people you were sitting with are still there.
But if you eat something different at your house,
if you eat something at the place where you went to, then you make a new bracha. But when you come back, you don't have to because the people that you were sitting with are still there. This is where we left off, yeah? This is all from the Gemara. Now comes Halacha Gimel to your point. All of these laws regarding making a new bracha when you go to a new place is with regard to matters, to food items, the kinds of things that don't require you to come back to the place and make a bench. Right? We discussed this. There are different. We're going to get into this in a second. There are different food items, all of which require an after blessing. But then there are things that the Torah, that the halacha itself requires you to come back to make the after blessing in the place that you ate. And if it's that kind of food, then the halacha anchors you to the spot that you were, and therefore when you walk away, you haven't finished your meal because the halacha is calling you back, and thus no new bracha when you walk around eating. But if you're eating, this is what we're talking about here. If you're eating food items that do not require you to come back to your spot to bench, which basically is anything that you would make a burden of fashos, which is not just shahakal, apples, right? So 8, but
yeah.
It's not from the 7 kinds, so it's burden of fashos. So the halacha doesn't require you to come back to your place. And therefore, when you stand up at the end of your meal, a new bracha when you walk away. As he says, going, for example, kol oichel mashke, and any food or drink, that they're after blessing, he buried nefashis rabbish is buried nefashis. If it's the full benching, it's washing, you definitely have to sit in your place to bench. Sit in the place where you ate to begin with. And if it is from the 7 kinds, where you're making a abridged version of the 3 of the full benching, the bracha bein shalish, what we call ala michya, then you also have to sit back in the place where you ate to make the bracha chayna. And in those cases, the halacha already anchors you to your place, and when you walk around, no new bracha. But if it's a kind of food where you don't have to come back to your spot, it's a burden of fashos, then when you walk away, that itself is the end of the meal because there's nothing tying you down to the place where you ate to begin with.
All of these, and it says no new bracha. We're only talking about the after.
We're talking about the bracha before. When you eat somewhere else, make a new bracha and you eat the new food. Right, we're talking about
Even if you didn't have in mind.
what are we talking about? You're talking about which
The
scenario?
first bracha, not the after bracha.
Or which scenario we're talking about? What kind of food are we eating?
Say an apple.
Okay,
But
that's a
you
food
left
item.
your primary place of eating. You went to a new.
New-
You were eating MEZONOS
In a new place.
in the first place.
You're eating an apple or MEZONOS
No, you
Not the
ate
same thing.
You ate MEZONOS in
in the first place.
you
So-
leave. You go. Let's say you had MEZONOS and something.
Okay, but you ate MEZONOS, which means that halacha requires you to go back there to bench.
And you go someplace else.
Yes, right.
You eat an apple, let's say.
Did you eat an apple in the first place? Did you eat or ate there?
No.
Okay, so for sure you're making
So
a new
you-
food item anyway. You're making a new bracha anyway because it's a new bracha. Because
Right,
before it was MEZONOS, now it's a eitz.
Okay.
For sure you're making a new bracha in that case.
But if you had a
Because the first is
bracha-
MEZONOS, then it's eitz.
Okay, all right.
Okay, let's go through the halacha here. What's that?
Let's say I'm having MEZONOS in shul. I make kiddush, let's say over not wine, but over, let's say, mashka. And I have MEZONOS in shul, but I have in mind that I am going somewhere else to eat. I already know I'm going somewhere else to eat before I even make my brachas on what I'm going to eat in shul, and I'm going to leave.
You're going to sit down for a full meal and wash somewhere else?
Yes.
So then what's the question?
The question is, do I have to bench before I leave?
For sure.
I have to bench before I leave?
Yeah, that's a new meal. Anyway, okay, we'll get to all this.
Okay.
Okay, so so this halacha that says that when you leave your place, you have to make a new bracha. That's only when you're eating the kinds of foods that the Torah, that the halacha doesn't require you to come back to the place where you ate. Namely, anything after which you'd be making a bar nefashos. As he continues, she'ein tzarech levarich bracha achena b'makom achila ishtiya. A food item whose after blessing is bar nefashos, one does not require to make that after blessing in the spot where they ate or drank. He's allowed to get up from his place before he does his after blessing, and go somewhere else and make the after blessing there. Ordinarily, if I want to, I can walk away from this tea and make an after blessing in the next room. That halacha allows me to do that. Therefore, the fact that I stood up to go from the spot where I've been eating and drinking, that constitutes the end of the meal. Because when I leave now, if I were to leave the tea behind and I walked out of the room, halacha does not require me to come back and make a bar nefashos here where I'm sitting. That means when I stand up and walk away, I'm done with my tea. And therefore, if I were to eat and if I were to drink a tea in the next room, or if I come back from the room back here and I want to drink my tea again, Suda acheresi, this constitutes another eating. Tuna bracha shenis, and I have to make a new shakal, a new bracha, or eight, whatever the item was. Even though I didn't make bar nefashos on my first drinking of the tea. Follow?
Right. But
So I'm drinking tea now, or an apple, or anything that's bar nefashos, and I walked out of the room. I wasn't expecting, when I made the bracha on this tea, I was not expecting to leave the room. Like right now, this is the fact at the moment. When I sat down to drink this tea, my intention was to drink the tea at the class. I had no intention to take the tea anywhere else when I'm done. Okay? So if I walk out the room, even if I'm holding the tea in my hand, I go to the next room, I have to make another shackle. Even though I haven't made bar nefashos on the tea that I've been drinking now, which is in my hand. Or if I left the tea here and I walked out, came back, new bracha shackle.
and when you do but when if I should, you do it once
I do it once in the whole thing.
on the whole thing.
That's right. And the point here is, why is that? Because theoretically, I could have made bar nefashos in the other room and left it to here, which indicates to me that the halacha, from the halacha's perspective, the fact that I walked away from the tea, I'm done drinking. Because halacha isn't calling. So even if I'm carrying the tea, that's not the chiddush. We discussed this the last class. Even if I'm carrying the tea, the fact that I got up and walked away indicates by halacha standards, I'm done this eating. When I go there, it's a new eating.
So I make my coffee in the kitchen. I make a bracha. I'm drinking the coffee. Now I come in here. And I want to
Okay, when you made the bracha on that coffee, you knew you were walking in here.
Yeah.
Right. So in that case, you had in mind, at least implicitly, in your bracha, that you're going to be taking the coffee with you.
Right.
So again, this is only specifically when I was not expecting to leave the room with this tea. and then I do, the fact that I left, that indicates end of meal. And therefore, when I drink the tea again in the next room, new bracha shakel. This is the unique halacha we're learning here. That's the whole din here. Yeah.
You can't get her anyways, I love the door.
What do I say? What do I say, Robert? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Does this also apply if you also had, let's say, Zionist with your?
No, so again, if I had mezonos, then a different story.
Then that joins.
Let's
all
see in
the
a second. That's what we're about to say
brachos,
right now. Yes, that's what we're about to do right now. But yes, because then it considers one eating meal,
It's one
and that
joint
meal is not over because the halacha is requiring me to come back to my meal spot to make
It's
that.
considered a meal.
It's considered an eating session. I don't know if you want to call it a meal, but it's an eating session. This is a drinking session right now with my tea,
Drinking,
and then I walk away. Drinking session over. New bracha shakel.
or a brain for short session.
No, he said even if I didn't make a bracha fashis on my original drinking session, I have to make a new bracha shakel on the drinking session and make bracha fashis on both. Okay,
You come back and drink the tea,
I still have to make a new bracha,
another brother.
another shakel, because when I walked out, that ended my drinking session. So any drinking afterward, I have to make a new bracha shakel. Even if I come back to the room, even if I'm holding the tea, doesn't make a difference.
But the room to room doesn't apply.
The room to room, he said, is a new location. He said,
Okay,
unless you had in mind that you're going to be walking around as
right.
Scott's scenario where he knew he was walking around with his coffee. Okay, more details are going to come. Aval, but the next paragraph in Halacha Gimel. Aval dvarim hatunim bracha lachareim b'makoimon. But if I'm eating the kinds of things that the halacha itself requires me to come back to my spot to make the after blessing. If you're going, for example, pas, bread, certainly bread, where I have to make the full benching. I have to come back to my spot to bench. Oya filu ma'isa or some other cooked dish, mechameshes aminim, that's made out of one of the 5 grains: wheat, barley, rye, oats, and spelt. Those are the 5 moitzi/mezonos type grains. So anything made of that, I'm required by halacha to come back to the spot which I ate to make the after blessing. Oya filu peidos mizayin aminim. Even or if I ate one of the fruits of the 7 kinds, which are wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. I don't know it's by heart so well. I'm looking at the footnote here that pops up and tells me. All right. So wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. Anything like that, halacha requires me to come back to my spot to make the after blessing. Likewise, yayin wine. Their after blessing on anything of the 5 grains, so any mezonos, or anything of the 7 kinds, or wine. Because the after blessing, which we colloquially refer to as ala michya, is what's called me'ein shalosh. It's really a abridged version of the full entire benching. If you look closely at the ala michya, it lists in there in brief all of the things that are discussed in the full after blessing. So it's considered a proper benching, just in an abridged manner. Therefore, he chashuva lahatzrich. Therefore, it is of importance enough that it requires it requires me to come back to my spot to eat, to come back to the spot where I ate, or the place where I drank, if it's wine. Just like I am required to come back to my spot and do the full benching if I were eating bread. Now, therefore, because the halacha anchors me to my spot and says, hey, come back here and bench. Therefore, when he gets up from his spot to go somewhere else, the fact that I got up does not constitute the end of my eating session or drinking session. Why? Because I'm still required to come back to my spot and make the after blessing. So even when I walk away, I haven't fully stepped away from this meal. I have full intention and requirement to come back.
With or without intent, right?
With or without intent, because halacha, that's right, I shouldn't have mentioned intent. Halacha is calling me back. So when I walk away, that's not considered the end of the meal. Because halacha says, hey, where are you going? Come back.
It's irrelevant if you left people or not.
It doesn't make a difference. Even if I'm drinking a glass of wine alone.
Because you didn't bench, that anchors you back to the table.
That's correct. And therefore, if he goes and he eats and he drinks, even in the other place, his eating and drinking is on the continuation, is anchored to his original eating session in that other room.
So when you come back,
L'sayim sudasai, only to complete his eating. And therefore, one second, let's continue. And therefore, certainly if I'm eating in the next room, I don't have to make a new bracha. And how much more so if I come back here and continue drinking my wine, I definitely don't have to make a new bracha. Because to begin with, Torah's halacha is calling me back. And I don't have to make another bracha before I continue eating. Even if I didn't leave anyone behind. It's irrelevant. Because the halacha itself calls him back. Now some more details, which we didn't have in the Gemara yet. Vahu, and all of this is if when I ate in the first location, I ate the size of an olive. But if I ate less than the amount of an olive, then because I didn't eat enough to require me to bench to make the after blessing in my spot, then when I walk away, it's like I drank a tea, which means a new bracha in the new location, right? Because again, what's anchoring me to my spot? The fact that the halacha requires me to come back and make an after blessing. But if I ate less than less than the amount of an olive, less than the volume of an olive, then I haven't eaten enough for the halacha to require me to make an after blessing in my spot, and therefore when I walk away, I'm not anchored, and therefore new bracha if I were to eat somewhere else. So if I had a crumb of cookie. Now, we should point out here something important and interesting, which I don't want to spend too much time on. So please no hard questions. but it's important to understand this, which is when we talk about the size of an olive, how much do we mean?
Very small.
Sorry?
Size of a piece of gum.
Right. So when you look at an olive with your naked eye, it doesn't look very big. We're talking about a very little amount. But whenever you're told to eat the size of an olive at matzah at the Seder, how much do you end up eating? A quarter of a matzah is way bigger than the size of the volume of an olive, even bigger than 2 olives. So what's the story here? Just very briefly. Sorry? No, it's the volume. But I'll explain in a minute why that what happened. Through many generations, Ashkenazi Jews didn't have olives. Didn't know what they were.
well, hold on a second. Ashkenazi Jews came much later,
Right.
so
So for many generations, they didn't know what an olive was. What's the difference when it comes? This is the fact. They didn't know what an olive was for many generations. In many lands, they didn't know what olives looked like. Because they're living in Germany, France, and olives are growing way out, and
But they knew what a kazayas was.
they didn't.
Kazayas was only at the
So
time
they
measured
were
against
guesstimating.
an olive.
It was an olive. The Torah gave measurement. The Torah didn't say ounces, milligrams, because if you do that, it's not going to be understood to the generation that doesn't use milligrams or ounces. And aside from the fact that until recently, I mean within the last century, the same word, ounces, meant different things in different places. And the same thing with milligrams and all these things, because they didn't have universal standards like we have today.
but the Jews,
Right. So one second. So when the Torah gave its measurements, it gave universal items that everybody can look at. But it so happened for centuries, people could not look at olives, didn't know what they were. Just the fact, doesn't matter where it came from or how late. For many centuries, there were many Jews who did not know what olives looked like. So they were guessing based on other references. They knew that olives were smaller than an egg, based on the halachic descriptions of them, and they knew it was bigger than other things. So they were kind of guesstimating what they were, based on text from the Gemara and from previous generations. Now, which ended up being that the halachic olive, is much bigger than the actual olive, right? But so what we do is we follow these 2 olives, the actual olive and the estimated olive that evolved over the generations. We follow them both l'chumra, to be more stringent.
Did the smaller measure?
Bigger.
Depends for what. That's the point I want to make.
Oh.
When it comes to eating matzah, being more stringent is
Oh, the bigger, yeah.
to take the bigger one.
When it comes to
When it comes to
praying,
this right now,
it's small,
which one's more stringent?
smaller.
If I'm eating a bigger than the actual olive, but smaller than the estimated olive,
Bigger one.
should I make the after blessing in my spot? Should I make a new bracha somewhere else? That little small zone makes it very difficult. And not always does stringent mean the bigger one. In this case, would stringent be the bigger one?
Would be if
In
you're
this
being
case,
more
yes.
stringent,
This-
the
this
smaller.
case, it should apply.
Why?
How is
Wait,
more stringent? Because then.
If a smaller
Depends
one,
what you mean by stringent. If you're
then
being
I'm making a
very-
wasted bracha. The halacha is required. So first of all, it would be more stringent to say come back to your spot and make it after blessing, certainly. If I ate the smaller olive, not the bigger one, it would be more stringent to say go back to your spot and make your bracha after bracha.
Yeah.
But if I'm following that, then when I walk away, do I make a new bracha? Is it more stringent to make a new bracha? Or maybe it's not more stringent because I'm wasting a bracha that I don't really need because I ate more than the technical olive.
It's not wasted.
Sure, it's a wasted bracha.
Bracha in vain.
Okay, that's called a wasted bracha. Bracha levatala, a bracha in vain. Sorry, different way of phrasing it. A bracha in vain is a more proper way of saying it. Yes, which is a problem. So it's not more stringent necessarily. If you go with the bigger one, I'll have to say, eat a little bit more so that it's definitely bigger than, I guess, than the made up olive of the halacha over the last generations. Just adding that. Okay, so now to add to that, let's continue. Some say Scotch, you have to come back tomorrow because not everyone's going to discuss your scenario tomorrow.
You'll have to carry on without me.
You listen to the recording. And some say Shemin Dogon Levad. Okay, so we said that what are the kinds of food items that require you to come back to your spot to make a bracha achrona? Anything that isn't burning nefashos, which meant bread, certainly, anything of the 5 kinds, any MEZONOS basically, and then anything that is from the 7 kinds, which means olives, dates, figs, wine, and pomegranates, then wheat and barley.
Anything that's not shahakol.
No, because an apple is not shahakal,
Anything that's not.
but it's not part of the 7 kinds,
Right, okay.
which means you're making burn nefashos on that, which means you can make it in the other room.
Right.
So it's anything that isn't burn nefashos. That's a better way of phrasing it.
Okay.
Now, but v'yesh omim, others say shemin dagon levad tom brachal akra b'mokayim. There are those that say that only things that are made of grain require you to come back to your spot and make the after blessing, which means either hamotzi or MEZONOS. So we just cut out
Or you-
wine, olives, dates,
Eggs.
figs, grapes, and pomegranates. We just cut those all out, according to this view. Because of their special status, shenikra mazon, that they are referred to as sustaining items. Basically, they are carbs. Because of that, halacha requires you to come back to your spot. So we just cut out, what did we say? We cut out wine, grapes, olives, figs, dates, and pomegranates. We just cut that all out. Others say, pas bilvad, only bread, actually. So now we cut out everything except for bread. So we have 3 different views as to what's considered, what does halacha require to come back to your spot? Which means, if I'm eating a cookie here, I wasn't expecting to be eating somewhere else, then I decide to walk out and get a cookie in the next room, I have to make a new MEZONOS, according to this opinion. But according to the first opinion, I don't have to make a new MEZONOS. Because according to the first opinion, I'm still required to come back to the bench. So what do? Says the Alter Rebbe, lachatchila yachmer, and therefore to begin with, he should be stringent. Of all the 7 kinds, levarach b'mokayim, to make the after blessing in the spot where he ate. And therefore, if it so happened that I left my spot, I shouldn't have. Because at least according to one view, I'm required to come back to the spot to bench. But I did. So now I just fell into the other category's view, the other view, which says I don't have to come back because I just violated the view which says you have to come back. So do I have to make a new bracha in that room? I have to be stringent. But what does it mean to be stringent? To make another bracha, not to make another bracha? We discussed this a few minutes ago.
For Kazite, you just had to eat a little more.
Right, but over here we're talking about another problem,
Right.
which is I ate dates. The stringent. One second. I ate dates. So stringency is so I ate dates. One view says it's part of the 7 kinds. You're required to come back to your place to bench. Another view says no, it's not. It's not a sustaining food. It's not a bread. It's not a MEZONOS. You don't have to come back to make a bracha on your spot. Okay, so being stringent means come back to your spot and bench. But I walked away, and I'm about to eat a date in that room. Do I make a new bracha on that date or not? According to one view, no, because you're anchored to your original spot. According to another view, yes, because you're not anchored to your spot. So what do? Which one's more stringent here? To make the bracha when I go there to eat the date, or not to make the bracha? Which one's more? Because it's more stringent, do you think? So says the Alter Rebbe, "Ein tzarich lachzer levarach." Don't make another bracha. Why? Because when it comes to brachas, stringency works backwards. The stringency is not to make a bracha. Because safek brachas lahakal. When you're in doubt about whether or not you should be making a bracha, you avoid the bracha. To be stringent about, God forbid, making a bracha in vain.
That was like a Sephardic thing.
The Alter Rebbe follows the Sephardim in that regard.
He
That's
does,
correct. I don't know if the Ashkenazim disagree in this particular case, but in general, the Ashkenazim actually make more brachas, and the Sephardim make less brachas, and the Alter Rebbe let the Sephardim make less brachas. For example, on our tefillin,
So
we only make one bracha on the hand and head in Chabad.
Oh, really?
Ashkenazim do two, Sephardim do one, and so does Chabad only do one. Yeah, and other scenarios like that. Not when it comes to Kiddush. The Sephardim, for example, are strict to Kiddush also, where only the Balabayit makes Kiddush for everybody. And the Chabad everybody makes their own Kiddush. But in other places, the Alter Rebbe is like the Beit Yosef to try to minimize blessings. So this is the rule. Safek brachas lahaka. When you're in doubt about making a bracha, you don't make the bracha to avoid, God forbid, saying God's name in vain. And therefore, in this case, where you're not sure if you should be making a bracha in the next room because one opinion says yes, make another bracha. Another opinion says don't make another bracha. We don't make another bracha.
Isn't Chabad spawned from Ashkenazi Jews?
Yes.
But they.
The Alter Rebbe diverges in some places.
But
In some areas, it diverges from the local custom.
the other option in that case would be the person could just go back to the original spot to eat the date, right?
Yes,
Which would be
the best thing to do.
if we could.
You should go back to the spot to eat the date if you want to. Really want to avoid this whole problem.
Yeah.
But no, but it wouldn't help you because once you leave the room, it makes a difference if you're eating in a different room or whether you're coming back. Exactly. No, even if you return, according to the other opinion, you have to make a bracha when you return anyway, because you left the room. Even returning,
Right, that's two different opinions.
correct. Walking out and coming back is the same thing as walking out and eating somewhere else. If you're of the
You
view,
could be violating too if you're eating the date without a bracha when you come back.
which is why I said to begin with, you shouldn't leave if you're eating such odd food items. But if you
Opposite
did,
right there.
if you did once you left, even coming back,
Doesn't-
same problem. Which you're not making a new bracha anyway because we're trying to be lenient. We're trying to be lenient about the bracha / strict about not saying God's name in vain, and therefore no new bracha. You clear on this? Halacha dalag, God willing, tomorrow we're going to get to your situation where you're going to a different home, and what kind of food items, and you're continuing to be somewhere else. Did you make a mitzvah, not make a mitzvah, benching, not benching? We're going to get into all of that, God willing, over the next couple of days. Okay, you have a good day. I apologize for being late again.
Go on. Yeah.